Hi, I'm Joseph Howell, and I'm making this little video to introduce ideas on how to apply really colorful, exotic, harmonic and melodic vocabulary, and intervallic as well, over even over standard tunes that we play in jazz. After one studies the traditional chords of jazz and what scales are in them and what notes are considered avoid notes, which notes aren't, in both the actual chord qualities, the scales, voicing them across the piano or ensemble. There's a couple of things that kind of seem like tendencies that would be really helpful for students to understand. So two main things. The first one is that if a chord especially, but even scales sometimes too, if you have a half-step interval, so that's two notes that are half-step apart, any note added to these need to be at least a whole step away from them. So if you have C and C sharp, you don't want to also have D. If you have C and C sharp, you don't want to also have B. So if I have C and C sharp, the next note I could have above is D sharp. And the next note below I could have is B flat. That's not a complete chord, so it doesn't really sound that great. But that got the point across, I hope. The other thing is that when you have a half-step interval that you feel like you can put in a chord, you need to voice it to where the bottom part of the chord, where you need your chord quality, like it's a major chord, a minor chord, whatever, those tones that give you that quality, you want to avoid having the half-step intervals in whatever scale you're creating or thinking of. You want to avoid holding out, sustaining a note that's a half-step above any of those notes. And when I say half-step above, I mean in any octave. So you could have G and A flat in the same octave, but A flat could also be up here. And especially when you separate it, it kind of gives you an easier name to call this. You want to avoid having a flat ninth interval. So if you're going to have a half step against the G that you want to sustain, and G is an important characteristic tone of whatever chord, then you would have an F sharp, because that makes a major seventh interval, or the added chromatic note is a half step below the chord tone. Now, major scales, for example, have the fourth degree a half step above the third, and the third, of course, is the main note you need besides the root to give you the quality of the chord. The root gives you like the location of it, the transposition, and the third gives you the major quality. So the melody can certainly play that fourth degree, but the chord needs to kind of not sustain it as a chord. Avoid having more than two notes in a row, so no more than two consecutive half steps. Or actually, as far as an interval has two notes in it, so you want no more than one pair of consecutive half-step notes, chromatic clusters. And if you're going to have that in a voicing, voice it as a major seventh interval. Except you can have flat ninth intervals sometimes from over the root and the fifth of a chord, because those notes are lowest, or usually voiced lowest. Of course the root always is, or it's not the root anymore really. And so it's really strong, the overtones. So you can narrow this down to a few guidelines. Number one, the largest number of consecutive notes a half step apart is two that you can have. After that, each note after that needs to be at least a whole step separated from it. And number two, if you're going to have something in there that's a half step away from a chord tone meaning the bottom, and it's a characteristic chord tone, then it needs to be in the original octave or in the name of the note, it needs to be a half step lower than the chord tone, not a half step higher, because then you make sure you're getting a major seventh interval, not a minor ninth interval. So in general, what you can take from this is that whatever you have as your bottom of the chord, the first 3 or 4 notes, you know, a triad or a seventh chord, for your 9, 11, and 13, the notes that will work against those are either going to be, in name again, a whole step up from the chord tones or a half step down from the chord tones. Now, one quick fix in more kind of contemporary music, but you almost have to be the composer of the lead sheet in this case, is that if you want to have, say, a perfect fourth and a major third in the same chord against the root. So say I have a major seventh chord and I want to play that C major seventh and I want to play F on it. Well, again, when I'm saying characteristic chord tone, I mean the bottom of the chord. So what you could do is just make the F the bottom and the E the extension. The F isn't the bottom, but in the bottom chord. So now what we have is a C major 10 chord, sus4. And that's a lot more pleasant because now the F and the E are voiced as a major seventh interval instead of a flat ninth interval. So again, guideline number 1 is to avoid having more than a pair in a row of consecutive half-step notes. And guideline number 2 is if there is going to be a half-step interval, they should be voiced as major seventh intervals, not flat ninth intervals. Or you could do them as a half-step below a chord tone in the middle of a voicing. So again, for stacking chords, whole step up, half step down are what can help you figure out what extensions to put above the bottom triad. If you look at scales, they're made up of a bottom triad and a seventh, and then a top triad that's almost always a whole step above the bottom triad. So in C major, the 9, 11, 13 is D major. So it's not only a whole step above like C to D, but in quality too, so it's parallel. In C minor, you have C minor triad plus B flat, and then D minor triad above that. So D minor above C minor with a B flat between. For C minor 7 flat 5, you have a diminished triad at the bottom, a minor seventh, and then a diminished triad, a whole step above the bottom one, up an octave. So up a ninth. Now since I'm playing these just up in thirds, they're not going to sound that great. Now if you have a C minor major 7 chord, that's a minor triad, plus a major 7th in the middle, plus a minor triad on top. That's up a ninth from the bottom triad. If I have a dominant 7th chord, you have a major triad, a minor 7th, and a major triad, a ninth up from the bottom one. If I have a altered dominant chord, the way I think about that is altered dominant sort of comes from tritone sub. So you're really thinking F sharp dominant over C, kind of, right? As far as the scale we think of and everything. Because it'd be F sharp Lydian dominant or C altered scale, same scale, just starting on different notes. They're modes of each other, in other words. But if I had F sharp dominant, it would be an F sharp triad, major triad, a minor 7th, and then a major triad a whole step above the F sharp. So F sharp major triad, an E for a 7th, and A flat major triad above that. So to make it C alt, you just that would be your chord above C. So again, it's still a triad pair separated by a whole step. So if you think back to what our guidelines showed us, it showed us that a whole step up from the chord tones works, but also a half step down works. The whole step triad pairs are very common in jazz, especially with major triads. Major triads are very melodic sounding, they're easy to understand. So a lot of people learn these patterns where, say, over C major 7, they play going back and forth in their head between C triad and D triad. And so forth. Now, the reason that that works so often on chords is because, like I showed you, all the usual chord qualities have a major triad, a whole step apart from another major triad somewhere in the scale if you look at where the possibilities would be. And that's also because the scales that we use for our chords are usually modes of either major or Ionian, whatever you want to call it, or modes of jazz melodic minor. And jazz melodic minor has the same notes as major except for the third. So if you looked at the Roman numeral chord qualities of what the diatonic chords in C major, let's just look at the triads. You'd have a major triad on the 1 chord, a minor triad on the 2 chord, a minor triad on the 3 chord, then a major triad again on 4 and 5. And you notice how the third of the scale is not on either of these chords. So that means switching it to C melodic minor wouldn't affect these two. So almost all the chord scale relationships we use, most typically, would have major triad pairs a whole step separated. Okay, so then that's because a whole step up works, but what about a half step down? There is one very common scale, maybe even more common to other types of music than jazz, and that is harmonic minor. You have, if you have C harmonic minor, you could find an A flat major triad and a G major triad. So those are major triads a half step apart. This video is kind of about two different things. It's about using the ideas of what the rules of stacking are to make crazier stackings, if you will, or to take the idea of triad pairs that are a whole step apart or a half step apart, major triad pairs. Now, modes of harmonic major have minor triads that are half step apart, but that would be another video. I'm trying to narrow it down to a few things. And then, so if you take all these different guidelines, you can begin to sort of work away at the tonality, but still kind of keep it intact by using the tendencies and just doing extra. So, or breaking rule number 1, but not rule number 2. Or, for example, if we like major triad pairs a whole step apart, how about major triad trios a whole step apart? So C major, D major, E major. Or if we like triads if we like major triads a half step apart, where the one you put over the chord is a half step down, up an octave, so up a major 7th. How about just doing that again? And so we'll get to that later. So we'll be looking at modes of harmonic minor, which have major triads half step apart. We'll be looking at double harmonic major, which has triads a half step apart again, major triads, and then we'll be looking at triad trios, which will be inspired by the two modes we'll first talk about. So again, interval stackings and how to use them as a suggestion for adding dissonance, triad pairs, using that as an example to add dissonance, and then triad trios, and then maybe a few other things. A minor. You know, or a jazz positioning of it. If I put the C sharp in there, then it's not going to sound like a minor chord to most ears anymore. So I have to revoice it. So root, 7th, 3rd, minor 3rd, and then put a major 3rd on top, the C sharp, and it doesn't sound minor anymore. But if you put B, which is a half step below the note on top, it still sounds minor. So that's really what we're talking about. So let's think of a couple of examples. So if I have a major 7th chord, if I put an A sharp in there, a C major 7, with a sharp 13, which rule does that break? It breaks rule number 1. Because if I change the register of the C and the B and make them all meet the same register, I'm now playing the A sharp, which is the sharp 13, the major 7, and the root. So as you can see, I have more than 2 notes that are half step together, more than a pair. Now as far as how I voice the chord, it does not break rule number 2, because I'm having half step clashes, but they're positioned in major 7s. So as I go up in octaves, the note name is going down in half steps. So C, down to B, down to B flat. And for whatever reason, that's more effective and probably the easiest way to get away with breaking rule number 1. And again, it has to do with register, what would you call it, separation. Now sometimes we permit having a flat ninth against, flat ninth interval against a root or a fifth of a chord. But even then, if you want to have the root or the fifth in the voicing beyond just being at the bottom, you're going to want to position it to where they're voiced as major 7th intervals. So if I have, let's say C7, so C dominant, I just played root, 3rd, 7th. We permit flat ninths and flat 13ths in dominant chords because they're flat ninth against the root and the fifth. And I think the reason why that's more permissible is because root and fifths are such strong overtones in the bottom of the chord that playing these notes isn't going to confuse you as to what the root is. But if these were the 3rd and the 7th of a chord, like say an A minor, playing that would confuse your ear and you'd think, I'm not sure that's minor. Okay? So it's not because root and fifth are unimportant. I think even in my diminished scale video, I didn't think enough about the wording I was using, and I kind of said that. But it's not that they're unimportant, it's that they're not easily confused. Even if you just play a root, the fifth will be so strong in the overtones that playing that doesn't ruin the effect of the C and the G sound. Playing a D flat and A flat above doesn't ruin it. But anyhow, with the voicing things that I'm trying to tell you about, if you want to have C, E, B flat, D flat, and or A flat, and you want to also have a G and a C in the top of the voicing, you want to voice it to where it's not C sharp above C, but C above C sharp. See how that already sounds better? Okay, so now moving on to how you can effectively start to mess around with these guidelines if you're mischievous or you just like these kind of sounds. Or also because sometimes learning how to break a rule can actually make you more aware of the rule, make you stronger at it. So if you have something where, say you have C major 7, C, E, B, those are the most important notes of the chord, right? If you want to be able to put an F in there, which everyone tells you is wrong, but if you're the piano player or the composer or you're unaccompanied and you want to have that F against E, the way to work is to flip which is on top, which is on bottom. Because right now, it's a flat ninth interval. Because the note that's name is higher. You see what I mean? So again, as you go up registers, the note name should go down if you're trying to do half-step clashes. So switch the F down to the bottom of the chord and put the E to the top. That's a lot more pleasant. And then if you look at my voicing, it's a major 7th interval off of C and a major 7th interval off of F. And so when you have that if you wanted to name this, it would be a C major 10 sus 4. You wanted to play a minor 7th chord and put an A flat in there. But you wanted the G in the voicing too, just so people don't worry, is it a half diminished chord or a minor chord 5th wise? And you wanted to establish that there's a half step between this note and the chord tone. Well, you could either voice it like a crunch, or, which crunches usually work in the middle of a voicing, not on the top like that. So make sure that the A flat is in a lower register than the G. And so the one way you could communicate that to a piano player is you could call this a C minor 12 sharp 5. Flat 6. So again, the first idea is that if you want a quote-unquote wrong note over a chord, switch the wrong note down to the bottom chord and the original chord tone up as an extension. Now as far as breaking rule number 1, the whole thing about how many half steps in a row can you have, which is usually 2, right? The register separation really comes in handy for that. So for example, say I had a C major 7. I don't know why I keep coming back to this chord, but whatever. You could have, say you wanted a sharp 9 and a sharp 13, which is already breaking the first rule. You could keep doing that. So basically what I'm doing is descending 5th intervals that are displaced one more octave each time. So I have E5, E flat 5, and then what I was going to get to is D5. So E5, E flat 5, D5 over C. What's interesting about when you do this kind of thing a lot is that the bottom 5th is the 3rd and 7th. The top 5th is the 9 and 13, just plain. And then the weird notes are in the middle. So actually, even though that sounds pretty weird, it's mostly the usual tones over that. One other thing is that if you do like the sound of minor 9th intervals, you can certainly do that. But you just need to understand that it's almost always going to have, it almost always has kind of wrong sound to it to a lot of people. And so, but you can definitely make it work. I think the way to make it work is that the things that you're playing in minor ninth positionings should be strange enough that people aren't expecting more traditional sounds anyhow. Or if you're a horn player and you're trying to make those kind of tones over the chords you're playing, maybe the melodic intervals that you're playing could be wide and weird too. So going back to the two rules, the important resulting concept I think from that is to realize that if you want to stack half-step together notes, the note names need to go down while the register goes up, or you can just do whole steps apart. Perhaps one of the reasons that the symmetrical, augmented, and diminished scales are so popularly used in jazz is because in their symmetrical build, all of the half-step pairs are separated by at least a whole step. And that makes it to where you can stack parallel things where everything's a major seventh interval higher than the thing below it. For example, B augmented over C augmented with triads, or B diminished 7 over C diminished 7. Or if you go above, it's a whole step or more. So it'd be D sharp augmented over C augmented for the augmented scale, and it would be D diminished 7 over C diminished 7. So it's a whole step above or more. I showed you, we often have extensions 9, 11, 13, are always, that are a whole step above the bottom triad. So that's the easy way for having notes above notes in the name, D above C, E above D, so forth. Now, for the other direction, where you'd have a B over a C, that's a little less common, just because, as many of you know, the main parent scales that we use in jazz to make modes out of are modes of major and modes of jazz melodic minor, where it's major scale with a lower third. When you have, for example, major triads that are a half step apart, that would be found in modes of harmonic minor. So if you have C harmonic minor, if you look at the notes for a while and think of what's in there, you have a G major triad and you have an A flat major triad. So those are a half step off. So say I wanted to have a voicing of harmonic minor that used the whole scale using what we've been talking about. Well, you could put A flat triad first inversion and then B triad first inversion. And then the entire thing is a major seventh above the bottom. Now if I switched these notes to where it was C, D, G, and then A flat and E flat on top, and maybe even a B in here and a C on top, where there's a lot of minor ninth intervals. In this case it doesn't sound so offensive, weird, but I think it's because I have so much of it at once. But it's safer to again do the major seventh interval. I think not safer, but more clarity is what it gives to the quality of the chord. Where someone could hear that and think, oh, okay, I get it. It's that kind of a chord. Whereas minor ninths kind of muddy up the sound. Is that a verb? So anyhow, that means that even though we have all those things that we like, where we do like a half step below a note pushed up a register as our relationships, the relationship to have a B triad or to have an E flat minor triad, especially above a E minor triad above C, is less common because it's harder not to break the rules. So if this was a mode of harmonic minor, that would be E harmonic minor, and it would be a B7 over a C major triad. I think it's more useful to think of it that way than a C triad, a D sharp diminished triad, and then the major seventh. I think it's, in this case, we want to think C major, B7. And that makes the whole scale. So the triad pairs are C and B, and then you also have the seventh for, again, the bottom triad in name, but in registration it's the top triad. So B is lower than C in name, but I've pushed it up to the registration to where it's above the C. So in order to start experimenting with the sound of half step below the main part of the chord and how you would adapt that to modes that would somehow go over other chords, or in this case what I've tried to do is, what I really want to do is apply the sound of two major triads a half step apart to all the chord changes that you can have. If you have C major 7, you could have that be E harmonic minor, and then so that would be made, that would have a C and a B triad, and again, so the bottom named one of that would have a flat 7 added to it if you want the rest of the scale. You could have an F triad and an E triad. Now the F triad has an avoid note in it, the F itself, traditionally in theory. But what's nice is since you have the E triad, you get quickly off of that note if you move around enough. Okay? So again, the let's see, in name the top triad is E, the F, and the bottom triad is E. So the bottom triad gets an added flat 7th if you want to use the scale. So it'd be F triad plus E7. And then if you think about it, that means I'm playing A harmonic minor over a C major chord. So that's just the usual relative minor relationship. What if it was a C minor 7? C minor 7? Well, we could use a G harmonic minor scale over that. And that would give you an E flat triad and a D triad with or without flat 7. So that gives you basically a Dorian sharp 4 kind of scale. Now if you have C9, so a dominant 7th that's not altered is what I mean by that. You could play D harmonic minor. Now remember, since we're stretching the rules a bit of tonality, there are going to be some weird notes in these scales. In this case, the root of the chord I'm playing on isn't in the scale I'm playing over. But I'm not going to really probably think of it as a scale anyhow. I'm going to think of it as that triad pair. So you have B flat triad, which has an avoid note in it, but luckily the other triad resolves it. So B flat triad and A triad. So A is the one that has the lower name. So you would add the flat 7 to the A. So B flat triad plus A7 would give you the whole scale. So what if I wanted to voice this? Well, I'd have my root, some inversion of the higher up in name triad, so that's B flat, and then the lower in name triad above that, which would be A. That way I have major 7th intervals instead of flat 9th intervals, except against the root, but we're not going to worry so much about that. And that gives kind of a nice sound, and then you can add a 7th to the A triad because it's the lower one. It's not really necessary, just so you have the whole scale in there. Then for a C alt, you could use the A triad again, and then the A flat triad. So this is the sound of that inverted diminished scale, where it's 13 flat 9 to have an A triad over a C7. And then the altered sound is to have an A flat triad over a C7, and that has sharp 9 and flat 13. So the lower triad is the A flat, so you could add the F sharp and the flat 7 to get the whole scale. And again, if I wanted to make a voicing out of this, I could have that would be a C, then a second inversion A triad, second inversion A flat triad. If you want, you can be sure to get the 7th of the chord in there, and the C7, or the 7th of the A flat triad. That's a lot of notes. So when you make voicings out of these things, in real use, you might want to sort of play it a bunch of times and pick your favorites that bring out the color. And you may not even want the root again up here. But it does kind of ground the sound. Then if you have a C minor 7 flat 5. You could have a G flat triad and an F triad, and then add the flat 7 to the F triad. So there's one kind of a void note, which is the C sharp, but then the other triad resolves it. And then there's an interesting note in here, which is the natural 13. But remember, these are modes of harmonic minor, so there's going to be some interesting stuff. Now, before I go on to the next chord quality, how do you use this? Well, I would say in your head, imagine the notes that are in that combination. And this is one of those things you need to internalize, right? So you don't have to really think really, really hard. And then you could make patterns out of it, like I showed you on the diminished scale. Or you could just try to, be melodic and randomly move around. So that was C half diminished. And my triads were F sharp and F. So you could make patterns go back and forth. Right? Or you could just improvise. So, little simple example. Then over a C minor major 7, so a minor chord with a major 7, just think about harmonic minor, the notes that are already in there, and I already showed you. So it's A flat, triad, and G7. Now, you could apply this to a diminished 7 chord instead of a diminished scale. And in that case, you would have C diminished 7, and you could play the G flat and the F7 against it. So there's two notes in here that are a little different or suspect if you want to go that far. And it's the B flat and the D flat. In the scale, it'd usually be a B and a D. So those are the ways you could apply the sound of half step apart major triads, and then again whichever the lower one in name is, you could add a dominant 7th to it, and then you would have, for example, C plus B7, and then that would make the notes a collection from a mode of harmonic minor. And then if you thought about, well, what's the best note to start that off of if my chord is a dominant or whatever, then you could use that sound. So I've tried to show you a few of those. Interesting scale, sort of related to that, is the double harmonic major scale. That is a major scale with a flat 2 and a flat 6. So starting on C, it'd be C, D flat, E, F, G, A flat, B, C. Now if you think about harmonic minor, the exotic part of it is the top tetrachord. Tetrachord, I think, means 4 notes. So the bottom of harmonic minor is a minor tetrachord. The top tetrachord is a flat 2 major 3rd natural 4 shape. people associate with Aladdin and stuff like that, right? Now, a double harmonic major scale uses this top tetrachord shape for the bottom of the chord as well. So you have, and that's the scale. Now there's a couple of things you'll notice already, that if this was over a major chord, the D flat would cancel out rule number 1, and almost everything in the scale is actually a half step above in name of the bottom chord. So you actually have a D flat triad and a C triad in a scale that starts on C. But remember, if you wanted to make this work, you could put these notes down here and then all the notes down here except for the root on top. So then you have root C, the D flat triad, and then E minor on top. So that's one way you could voice the scale in its parent form. Now, as I already pointed out then, it has major triads that are a half step apart. D flat and C. Now if you remember harmonic minor modes, we would have had D flat and C7, flat 7, to make the rest of the scale. In this case, just take that bottom named triad, D flat, and then the C, and add a major 7 instead of a dominant 7. And then you can take all your thinking from before, when you're thinking about, you know, an F triad and then an E7 as a pairing. Well, now think F triad. Well, you could think F triad and E triad still. Or if you want this whole exotic sound, superimposed normal chords would be F triad and E major 7. So if I just played it like that, it would sound like this. So when you get to this scale, you're going to have to be more choosy about how you voice the chords and how you apply them. I think you can figure out some of the applications of the scale to different chord qualities, kind of using the same reasoning I did with harmonic minor modes. For example, in a D minor 7 chord, the main major triad you'd have in there would be an F. That's really where the chord quality comes from. The third, the 7th, right? And the 5th tells you at least that it's not diminished or something. Or half diminished. So then, having an E triad on top of that, as long as you put that on top, doesn't really cancel that out, because again, we like major 7th intervals. The only note that's a little spooky and confusing to the ear maybe is this, because then it makes it sound like a half diminished and a minor at the same time, sort of, right? So that's the level of exotic you already had in the modes of harmonic minor. Now for a mode of harmonic major, you're going to have F major triad, go down a half step but up in register, play an E triad on top, then go down a half step but up a register and put an E flat on top, and that's the major 7 for the top triad. So again, this application doesn't always have the actual root of the chord you're playing over in the scale. That's not really the point, obviously. Because when you're doing this, you're thinking about stackings, to me. That's the only word I can really think of. In fact, I think, especially for a wind player with arpeggios and stuff that we can use, as long as you have the ability to take arpeggios and make them horizontal in your head, then you can always kind of just think triad stackings or anything. So if you had C triad and D triad, if you can just in your head realize that you could plan translate everything to some linear mode of double harmonic major. Just think, you know, find where the half-step triads are, the half-step major triads, and then add a major seventh to the bottom name, the bottom in name triad. So if the two triads are D and D flat, the name D flat is lower than D chromatically, right? But I'm putting it up higher, so it's a little hard to explain. And then you add a major seventh. So as I go through this video, we're going to get farther and farther removed from the usual. And when you make a linear thing out of this, what you get, accidentally even, are those augmented second kind of sounds. So here, they would be, or sorry, they would be here. And so you just have to imagine the two triads. I'll go ahead and go over quickly the ones that I think work, where to have the triad and then the major seventh chord. And I have little notes that I prepared for myself. So if you have C major 7, C major 7, you can have a D flat triad and a C major 7 triad. So again, that wouldn't really be the way you'd voice it, but if you turned it into scale, it would just be double harmonic major, which is the original one. So it's very usable. You could also have F and E major 7. So that would be more for people who really like a major 7, sharp 5, sharp 9 kind of sound, who don't always want to play augmented scale. You could also have sort of a C triad and a B major 7. So that one's a little weirder. So that's for people who want to get into a sharp 13 sound for a C major 7 chord. And for a C minor 7 chord, you can have a B triad and a B flat major 7. Maybe you could have an E flat, this is more unusual actually, an E flat triad and a D major 7. So linearly it would sound like, so some of these things have real avoid notes, but you can just move away from them. But even if you move away from them, people will still hear that. For a C7, not alt, you could have an F sharp and an F major 7. So you have a little avoid note in the F, but the thing also has an F sharp and an E. So you can easily move around and away from it. You could also have a B flat and an A major 7. Again, the B flat triad has the sound of a sus chord. The A triad has the sound of a inverted diminished application. And then we're playing just the bottom note, the A flat, as being a major 7 on the A chord. So this is like mixing a little bit of the octave octatonic sound with the altered sound. So you could have. So that's the sound we're thinking of here. Linearly, it might sound, so very exotic. Now on a C7 alt, you could have sort of a C triad and a B major 7 triad. You could have an E and an E flat major 7. You could have an A and an A flat major 7. This one I like a lot. So you have the A triad and an A flat major 7. Then you could have G flat and F major 7. So really try to make melodies out of these. Don't just stick to something like whatever, little patterns. Then for a minor 7 flat 5, you can have a triad off the 2 and the flat 2, and then add the major 7 to the flat 2. The sun just went down. Okay. And then B and B, so a triad off of the major 7 and the flat 7. That one's probably the most applicable. For a C minor major 7, you have A flat and G major 7. So A flat triad and then G major 7. So then you might voice it like maybe like this. Or maybe I don't know, you'll have to experiment with that. Then for a diminished chord, you can have a B triad off the 7 and the flat, and a major 7 off the flat 7. So for C diminished, that'd be B triad, which is nice, and then a B flat major 7 with the B flat being the only weird note. as we've seen, chords like to have parallel things put on it that are either going up in whole steps or down in half steps in name, and then usually also while that happens the octave is being changed up each time instead of just being it'd be, and instead of it'd be what I just did already gave you what I'm going to go on to now. So we've had chords all the time in jazz that have the original triad and then a triad above it, a whole step up. So if we're trying to find ways to follow that logic but kind of go more outside, then we could just go up a whole step again. So then you'd have E major over C major. What would it sound like if we did the whole chord that way? So C major 7, D major 7, E major 7. Now I think as an improviser, people talk about sidestepping or playing other keys over the original key all the time, but this middle one of playing D major 7 over C major 7 isn't as effective. I mean, you can certainly pull off playing the flat 9 over major 7 if you do it the right way. But the real juice of what we're getting at is this E major 7 over C. So major third up. So the same thing with minor chords. It'd be C minor 7, D minor 7, and E minor 7. Now I've had it claimed to me that in the overtones of C minor, there's actually an E natural in there somewhere anyhow. But also we're climbing registers, so as you keep separating notes, it seems to be more permissible to have some weird stuff. I mean, what if we kept going, So one way of having some interesting stuff is to now have triad trios. C major 7, you could play like C major, D major, and E major. If you're trying to go for this sound. So I was just kind of thinking back and forth between a couple of notes each one. The other way, as I've been saying, is to go down a half step each time in the name of the thing, but then moving it up. Now in chords, you might want to find where there's a nice triad trio half step apart. So what you're going to run into is there's definitely going to be wrong notes at this point. Most of these chords can handle 2 triads at a half step apart, but then when you add this next one, it's going to add some more dissonance, obviously. So we're really getting into stuff that isn't traditional at all. So for like a C major 7 chord, you could have a D flat triad, a C triad, and a B triad. So the C triad is the root, the D flat kind of comes from the harmonic major thinking, and then the B triad kind of comes from the diminished major 7 kind of sound. So now you're going to have all that together. So you're going to want to voice the chord in this kind of a way, where it's in major 7s, but then C's on the bass. So if you want to group that a certain way, or whatever, you could go C, D flat first inversion, major triad, C first inversion, major triad, maybe minus the root, we don't need it again, and we're trying to sneak in a bunch of notes, so we probably don't want to have ones we don't need, and then a B triad. sound, and it's kind of developed on what we already had. Because earlier we were making chords that were two half-step related triads, first with a dominant seventh added to the top triad. Then for double harmonic major, we changed that to major seventh. And now we're taking that major seventh and making it a root of another triad. So you F triad, E triad, and then it's major seven, E flat is another triad. And what's cool too is that if you stack them this way sometimes, which you certainly can, you'll have the sound of the chromaticism going down while you're going up. And obviously you can mask it to where it doesn't just sound like you're playing like Rosetta, the tune that goes, you know, just going down half steps. Obviously you can scramble the notes around. Alright, so now on a C minor 7, this is one of the ones where no matter what you do, one of the three triads is kind of not that great. But that's kind of what we're looking for anyhow, right? So E flat is already in there. Then D. And then the one that's going to rub a lot is the D flat triad. So you could find maybe other ways of voicing it, of course. Leave out some of the notes, you know, different things. Maybe have a few flat ninth relations. How about then for a dominant seventh chord, we already kind of got into this before, that a B flat triad over a C7 makes it like a sus sound, and an A triad makes it like a 13 flat 9 sound, and an A, sorry that was an A triad, an A flat triad makes it like a flat 13 sharp 9 chord. So if you have all of them, maybe put a C, then maybe a B flat triad second inversion, then an A triad second inversion, and an A flat triad second inversion. So again, you could try different voicings. Then over a minor 7 flat 5, you can have a, no matter what, the kind of thing about it is it's going to have two triads that are kind of okay, and then the third triad is going to have a major third, so that's kind of the bad part. But again, we're kind of creating a slippy, slidey kind of sound anyhow. So D, or maybe you could do a B, B flat, A. Maybe that one's better. So if you did that in a different order, then for a C minor major 7 chord, you could do A flat, G, which is natural, and then just go to G flat, which is weird. So maybe experiment with it, you know. Now some of you probably want to turn the video off now and think this is just insane. But just like when you first explored major scales, you kind of had to really figure it out for a long time. And even for me, I'm still figuring out how I would use this. If you watch my videos or listen to my audio clips or see me play live, I don't play this stuff that often. It's very kind of special stuff. Or I might play it often, but not constantly or whatever. And I've found sort of my favorite ways, favorite parts of it to use, you know. Over a C diminished 7, the triads could be, again, there's going to be a major third at some point, but it's a B triad, B flat triad. So far there's only one weird note, a B flat, and an A, which gives you a major third and a flat 9. So those are kind of your weird notes that you want to play sometimes but get off of. So okay, so now I'm going to try to show you, I mean, I think you got the idea, but I'm going to try to show you what it might sound like to try to make lines out of these triad trios over the kind of first 8 bars of Autumn Leaves. That was not a very good solo, but it shows you maybe some of the properties of the sounds. Alright, so now maybe I'll try to make some voicings for the first couple of chords of all the things you are using triad trios. I'm just making these up on the spot. Okay, so as I was saying, you could have whole step related major triads in trios. Over C major, that could be E, D, and C. C minor, that could that could be G, F, E flat. Here, I'll kind of show you very quickly. And then over a dominance, you could have D, C, and B flat. B flat, A flat, G flat. For a minor major 7, you could have triad off of the 5th, the 4th, and the flat 3rd, kind of. And then over a flat 5, you could have the triads off of the flat 7, the flat 6, and the flat 5. And then for diminished, maybe the same. So let's see how the lines sound. If I just kind of tinker around with them over, again, the beginning of Autumn Leaves. mentioned the augmented scale. The version that a lot of people use has 6 notes, and like the diminished, it's symmetrical, but it goes root, augmented second, flat second, augmented second, flat second, augmented second, and then root again. And since it's symmetrical, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you're back at E, which is the same as the C one, if you look at the notes in it. So, and it's also looked at as being a triad pair, half step apart, but augmented triads. So B augmented triad over C augmented triad. So again, I'm being sure to voice them where I have major 7th intervals, not minor notes. Which actually sounds kind of cool at the moment. So sometimes it works. Then there's a 9-note augmented scale, which is more related to what we're talking about. So I'm just kind of skimming over the 6th note. Maybe I'll make a video about it sometime. Where you have 3 triads a half step apart. So going up major 7ths. So you have C augmented triad, B augmented triad, and B flat augmented triad. So again. And then in the scale, that's also symmetrical. It goes whole step, half step, half step, whole step, half step, half step, whole step, half step, half step. It has 9 notes, so that means 3 are missing, and those 3 are the last remaining augmented triad of exclusive notes that are different. So you have C augmented triad, B augmented triad, B flat augmented triad, and A augmented triad gives you all 12 notes if you look at all the notes I just played. Apply the 6-note augmented scale to changes of chords, and then you just play the same ones, same relationships to a tune, and then just add one more major 7th up of an augmented triad. So if you like playing B over C augmented triads over a C major chord, and you want to get 9 notes in there instead so that you have a couple of weird notes slipping in and out as you move around, then you add in the B flat augmented triad. And also you can think of it as being C whole tone and C augmented. Because C whole tone is C augmented and B flat augmented. C augmented is C augmented, B augmented. And then 9-note augmented is C augmented, B augmented, B flat augmented. So, for one example that's not a major chord, you would play, on a minor chord, you would play the augmented scale that starts on its minor 3rd. Okay? So you could do the 9-note version or the 6-note version, starting on the same notes for each chord, once you figure out what those best choices are. And when I'm picking these scales and stackings that have wrong notes, the way you kind of pick them is you just really have to look at what is the important note of each chord. You know, with major chords, we try not to clash with the 3rd or the 7th that much. Usually we try not to clash with either of them. But if you're going to clash, just clash with one of them. I think if you look at all these, what has been sounded during this lesson, most of them only clash against one of those notes, not both. Now, last week I also touched on a subject that I didn't really go over very much. I just kind of introduced it, which is the 10-note scales that Messiaen has, which are like the whole half scale plus either these 2 notes or these 2 notes. I didn't really say, any advice to how to improvise with it. what I did recommend is that you keep the pool of notes that are in the diminished scale off of C in your head, and then once in a while throw in whatever pair of notes you're having in there. So say I want to play that scale plus C sharp and G. So I could improvise around for a while. Let's make it all over a B7. So we're going to make it the sound of what I'm doing, an inverted diminished with a couple of wrong notes. Say I wanted to do the other version where it's plus E and B flat. Let's make it D7 this time. Same scale relationship. Okay, well, thanks for watching. I hope this gives you some ideas for exploring color over chords. And I really want to encourage the idea to use these things for improvisation, not only composition a lot. So I think there's a lot of color to be found in pitch, even though there's only 12 different notes with in harmonic and octave equivalents. There's only 12 notes, but still there's a lot more color you can get over it if you really think about the relationships of it to these basic chords like major, minor, dominant, half diminished, so forth. Cool, thanks for watching once again, and if you want more advice on geared towards you as an individual about how to practice some of these things, contact me at my website. Maybe we can do lessons. In the future, I hope to post more stuff like this, maybe an exploration of just augmented scales, for example, or piano voicings. But I also want to do more clarinet stuff for clarinet players, so I might do some things about clarinet techniques, or also at some point I want to make a video about telling a story, building a solo to a climax, pacing a solo, which is more stuff that I kind of learned from my early jazz, kind of classic jazz, Dixieland roots, where each chorus you get hotter, they call them. Okay, cool. This is definitely enough stuff for one video. Thanks. See you next week.